Showing ID before you vote is no big deal. Everyone has ID, right? In case you haven't noticed, the presidential election is almost here. Soon, everybody can go to the polls and cast their ballots to decide the fate of America. Well, almost everybody. Since 2008, 10 states have successfully implemented strict voter ID laws that are meant to prevent voter fraud, but in reality, make it harder for a lot of people to vote. 3 of them make you show either a photo ID, like a driver's license, or non-photo ID, like a bill with your name on it, before you can vote at the polls. The other 7 will only let you vote if you have a photo ID. So depending on where you live, what you need to do to vote in our national election can be totally different. America! So why have these laws popped up recently? Well, in theory, they prevent voters from impersonating someone else. That way we can all feel confident in the accuracy of the election process without worrying that some kid is sneaking into the polls wearing mustache glasses. Yo, fake IDs, vote twice! But here's the thing. The kind of fraud voter ID laws claim to prevent practically never happens. In fact, a report concluded that voter impersonation is rarer than being struck by lightning. Even FoxNews.com reported that this kind of voter fraud rarely happens. Wait, did I just agree with Fox News? Oh my god! So why even bother having voter ID laws at all? Good old-fashioned voter suppression with a dash of racism and classism for good measure. Requiring voters to have ID seems like a harmless precaution until you realize the majority of people lacking ID are either elderly, poor, and aren't white. And frequently, they're all 3. Statistically, African American and Latinx voters are much less likely than white voters to have the qualifying IDs required by states with voter ID laws. They're also disproportionately likely to be low income. Even when a state offers free photo ID, these residents may not be able to afford the underlying documents, transportation, or time required to get one. Many Republicans pushing for voter ID claim the laws have nothing to do with race or class. But in 2013, North Carolina County Precinct GOP Chair Don Yelton told The Daily Show that if the state's new voter ID rule hurts a bunch of lazy blacks who just want the government to give them everything, so be it. Tell us how you really feel, Don. And speaking of North Carolina, they passed a law that imposed strict photo ID requirements on voters, in addition to ending voter registration outreach programs that historically increased black voter turnout. Thankfully, this past July, a federal appeals court actually struck down North Carolina's voter ID laws, claiming they targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. See, voter ID laws are a classic example of structural racism, which is what makes racism different from prejudice. Prejudice is the individual dislike of a class of people based on a superficial characteristic or stereotype. Racism is racial prejudice plus structural oppression and power that negatively impacts a group. Structural racism often exists in the form of policies or laws that may or may not seem overtly racist, but ultimately cause negative consequences for people of color. Pop quiz! What's the best way to make sure racist laws stay on the books and new rules aren't put into place? Ooh, I know, make it really difficult for people of color to vote! And that has a long history in America. After the Civil War, the 15th Amendment was ratified, making it illegal to deny a male citizen the right to vote based on race. But that didn't stop election officials from falsely telling black voters they'd gotten the date wrong or that they were in the wrong polling place. Other voters were told they had to pass a literacy test first. Some were even forced to recite the entire Constitution. Really? Who can do that without Google? Fast forward to the civil rights movement in the 1960s. After the violent attack by state troopers on peaceful activists protesting in Selma, Alabama, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed, which explicitly made voter discrimination illegal. Because of the act, turnout of black voters increased tremendously. Of course, not everyone was happy about this. Some states took issue with Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which required states with a history of voter discrimination to seek federal approval before making changes to voter laws. This was basically the federal government's way of looking at states who've been shady towards voters in the past and letting them know, we see you. But in 2013, in the case of Shelby County versus Holder, lawmakers argued enough time had passed that it was no longer fair to make these states undergo the extra approval because, racism is over. The Supreme Court agreed. So after Shelby versus Holder, states like Alabama were free to change election laws without approval from the Justice Department, and many of them took advantage of this to create the voter ID laws we see today. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who dissented from the decision, said, "Throwing out pre-clearance, when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes, is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. And when it comes to racism, it's still raining. A lot." So why does all this matter? Well, beyond ensuring every American has the right to vote, the key to ending structural racism is by replacing it with a better structure. It isn't just about people changing their racist behaviors, although that's certainly part of it. It's also about reassessing the way those behaviors get written into the very laws on which our country stands. And if you're not sure what you need to do to vote in your state, our friends John and Hank Green put together a great YouTube channel called How to Vote in Every State. You should also check out MTV's ElectThis.com to learn more about the election. We'll put links to both sites in the description box so you can make sure your voice is heard this November. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.